This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Mashael Alhumaidan, welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward. I have been waiting a long time to do this. I'm very excited to have this conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy and honored to be with you as well.
Thank you so much for saying that. I follow you on Instagram, and we were introduced by our dear friend Sara Al-Ale, who is the host of the Mapper Forward Middle East podcast. And I was taken by you on your appearance on that podcast because you make sensory science poetic. You make it something that feels a lot less intimidating for people who can't quite get their head around what it all means. And so as soon as I heard you on that podcast, I was like, Sada, we have to get Mashael on the English podcast because
I really appreciate these forms. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So you are a sensory scientist and a huge fan of coffee. So in this series, we're going to talk about sensory science, and we're going to talk about the relationship that it has with coffee and why it's important. There are a couple of ideas in sensory science that I would like to ask you about because I'm quite confused by the idea of how you can say that taste is subjective and also say that it's a science all at the same time. So I'd really like to explore that in this series with you. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what a sensory scientist is, and who better than you to tell us what that is. So can you tell us what you do and what sensory science is all about?
Absolutely. So if we're talking in a scientific description of what a scientist can do, specifically a sensory scientist, it's a field that is filled with challenges because it's one of the sciences that has a lot of branches. It works and collaborates and adds to other sciences as well and other disciplines. A sensory scientist, unlike many would say or think that we taste food all the time. No, that's not what a sensory scientist does. Believe it or not, people are always asking me and linking that to my weight. Like, you don't look fat. How come you're a sensory scientist?
People are so human, aren't they?
I know. So the fact when I tell them actually that we have a whole process of hiring sensory panelists and we train them in a certain way that they would do the evaluation for us, it amazes them that, oh, so you don't have to do it all. Absolutely not.
Right.
Now, being a sensory scientist is really exciting, and I would absolutely encourage anyone who wants an exciting, changing career on a daily basis, that would be the career for them because it's the furthest from a routine work. Every day you have a new challenge. Knowing your methodologies, knowing your statistics, knowing your tools empowers what you give back to wherever you work at. Whether you work in the corporate world, in the academic, in the research field, any of these fields, it really, as a sensory scientist, really adds a lot of value to all of these places, particularly when you know the science, when you know what are you actually dealing with. This gives a lot of value to being a sensory scientist. So if you want me to explain more on what do we mean by the methodologies and statistics. All right. So in sensory science also we deal with two different groups of people. One in which is everyone, including everyone in the world, consumers. And the other part is the sensory trained panels in which we, screen, train, and select, and we really test their senses and make them perform at a certain team, at a certain sensitivity level. For example, for if we're talking about coffee, there are a lot of, and we're so lucky in the coffee world, there are a lot of standards that we can
Mm.
train based on. But that is not the case for many products. Like, for example, where I work for, I create the standards, I create the definitions, the
Wow.
lexicons, we get the references we need. We basically train the panel from zero for every certain or particular product.
Wow. And how do you become qualified to be able to have that responsibility? What's the career training path to become a sensory scientist?
Well, in my case, I had a scientific degree. Like
Hmm.
I hold a bachelor degree in nursing sciences.
Hmm.
So what I did is that when I started working at the company I
Excuse me.
work for, I found a degree, the postgraduate certification in
Hmm.
University of Nottingham. It's a very nice, or I would say very flexible program. It's
Hmm.
for busy people. That's how they market for it. In which I was going forward and backwards to the UK to do the courses, the exams, and then do the coursework from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So basically, when you've done the studies, and absolutely when I was working and doing the studies at the same time, that made a huge difference and huge jump, to be honest, in
Mm.
my expertise. I even was impressed by, wow, it really makes a difference when you know the science behind what you're doing in the labs. Because I was taking just general courses and trainings,
Hmm.
but when you actually go to the scientific part and understand the science behind every single step behind what you're doing, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I really apologize for my
No,
cat.
it's totally fine. For anyone that's listening, we've got two beautiful kitties in the background, and they're just it's the middle of the night in Saudi Arabia and it's their bedtime. We had this conversation beforehand, and Michelle was kind of worried that they were going to get in the way. It's totally fine. We're good. Um, so so you have to. So it's university level training. It's also, I assume, uh, on the job training so that you can marry the science that you've been taught with the experience of the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
How
Yes.
how how do you know, given that what you do is uh, it's like the products that you release are going to get purchased and experienced by many people across the Middle East. And so, how do you know that you have the experience and the knowledge to take on that responsibility?
So this where the beauty comes in. As I
Mm-hmm.
just mentioned, we work in multidisciplinary functions.
Mm-hmm.
So the consumer science itself, yes, I do the sensorial part of it.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is a lot of market research and marketing related and consumer behavior related studies that has to take place alongside with the sensory. Yes, we can support in these, and we can absolutely guide how the product should taste like, should look like, based on consumer pains that they want, you know, to relieve by buying or purchasing such a product. So sensory science on its own, it's not going to serve the right product. It has to be part of the multiple disciplinary teams you have in the company, but it's I would say it's a main function that you must rely on for such decisions.
Especially if you're creating fast moving consuming goods, right?
Absolutely. Now, if we look at another disciplinary function, like for example, the quality.
Mm-hmm.
In quality cases, you cannot absolutely proceed without applying sensory studies or tests for your product. So, for example, once a company sets their quality standard on the sensorial properties of the product, a sensory team must try that product, test it, and then release it based on meeting or not meeting the specifications of the quality. That is a very straightforward thing.
Yeah.
However, in the case that you mentioned, like consumer liking and acceptance and increasing the purchase, that is, I would say, a little bit more complicated process in which a lot of data needs to be captured.
Right. So how involved do you get in the consuming part of it, in the decision making around that? Are you an advisor? Do you take a lead part in that? How does that work?
Well, we like to call the sensory and consumer science as a supporting function.
Right.
We can absolutely guide. We can absolutely give all the advice we can. However, it depends on some, projects or companies who is taking the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually as a supporting function, it's not our call. It's our call to design the right tests, to choose the best products to represent in such tests as well. We can give real product changing advice, like taking a whole ingredient out, adding something to it, changing how this product is manufactured, baked, or cooked. However, it's totally up to the client or the project leader how they want to take this forward.
Okay. In the next episode, I want to talk about what sensory science actually involves, like how the senses are all brought together for a product like coffee, and how a sensory science would approach invoking all the senses to enhance a coffee experience. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.